You will be planning your own wedding.
I beg your pardon.
You received my letter.
I did.
You don't know what you're standing in the middle of, Miss Fair.
I know more than you assume.
I could not leave you entirely unprotected and pretend to myself that it was for your independence.
Come in, before the neighbors wake up.
The letter arrived on a Tuesday. Black wax. The Ashenmore wolf, mid-stride, chin lifted, unafraid, pressed into the seal as though the creature itself had signed the thing. Rosalind Fair broke it standing at her desk, still in her working dress, her hair pinned back, her ledger open beside a cup of tea she had forgotten to drink. She was always forgetting small comforts in favor of the task directly in front of her. It was, most days, her greatest flaw and her finest quality. She read the letter once, then again. Miss Fair, you are requested to present yourself at Ashenmore House, Grosvenor Square, at 10 o'clock on Thursday morning. You have been retained to plan a wedding of the highest discretion and utmost urgency. All details will be provided in person. Compensation will be exceptional. R. Vane, Duke of Ashenmore, no pleasantries, no explanation. Just command dressed in the language of request. She set the letter down and looked at it the way she looked at floor plans that didn't quite add up, steadily, waiting for the error to reveal itself. The Duke of Ashenmore had no known fiancé. No whisper of a courtship, no announcement, no rumor in the circles she moved through. And in those circles, whispers were the only currency that mattered. She planned weddings for the peerage. She knew everything. She was supposed to know everything. Highest discretion. That phrase was carrying more weight than the rest of the letter combined. She accepted. She folded the letter, placed it in the drawer beneath her ledger, and went back to work. Thursday came gray and cold, the kind of October morning that made London feel ancient. She arrived at Ashenmore House at precisely 10, her leather portfolio under her arm, her expression composed, her heartbeat considerably less so. The butler admitted her in silence. She walked not to the morning room, not to the drawing room, but to the Duke's private study. Dark oak, firelight, the particular hush of a space that answered to one person alone. He was standing at the window when she entered. He did not turn immediately. She had seen the Duke of Ashenmore at a distance twice before. Once at a society dinner she had organized, once at a garden party, where she had spent the evening invisible, as was her professional habit. He was not the kind of man you missed at a distance. Tall and still, with the particular authority of someone who had never needed to announce himself in a room. He turned. His eyes found her immediately, with the directness of a man who had already decided what he thought, and was waiting to see if she would surprise him. "Miss Fair," he said. "Seat." She sat, not because he told her to. Her knees had made a quiet decision of their own. He crossed to the desk. He did not open with pleasantries. He placed a document before her. Thick paper, heavy language, the particular weight of legal architecture, and he said 6 words. "You will be planning your own wedding." The fire did not change. The room did not move. Rosalind's portfolio slipped from her lap to the floor, and she did not move to retrieve it. "I beg your pardon," she said. "The contract before you is a marriage settlement." His voice was even, quiet, the tone of a man discussing drainage routes rather than the sudden restructuring of another person's entire existence. "Between yourself and me, the wedding will take place in 8 weeks. You will plan it. You understand discretion. You execute under pressure. The position requires both." She stared at him. He met her stare without blinking. "You have not asked me," Rosalind said. Her voice, to her enormous relief, came out level. Something moved in his eyes, not amusement, not quite, but a close relation of it. Something that hadn't expected her tone and found it, against all probability, interesting. "I am telling you," he said, "there is a difference." "There is indeed," she agreed, "and I have no intention of being told into a marriage." She stood. She picked up her portfolio from the floor. She walked toward the door with the calm of a woman who had managed catastrophic flower delivery failures and last-minute venue collapses, and had never once let anyone see her falter. His voice reached her 3 feet from the door. "Miss Fair," still quiet, still that controlled precision. "There are men who would be very interested to learn that you refuse this, men who believe that a woman in your position, unmarried, no family of consequence, building a business on borrowed access, should be manageable." She stopped. She did not turn immediately. She stood still and let the full weight of what he'd just said settle over her like cold water. Then she turned. He had not moved from behind the desk. His hands, she noticed for the first time, were closed tight against the desk's edge. Knuckles are just barely pale. He was not as calm as he sounded. 8 weeks, he said. Plan the wedding. Attend the events at my side when required. I will explain my reasons in full, but not today. Today I need only your answer. Rosalind looked at him across the firelit room, at the man who had upended the morning without apology, at his controlled voice and his closed hands. I will stay, she said quietly. I will plan every detail of this wedding, but you will owe me every reason you are withholding. Every single one. The Duke of Ashenmore held her gaze for a long moment. Then, barely, he nodded. She was given the East Wing, her own suite, her own maid, a room designated as a working studio with 3 windows, and a writing table large enough to spread floor plans across. It was more space than she had ever had in her own hired rooms. She tried not to notice how that felt. The first working session was set for the following morning. She arrived with her portfolio, her lists, her professional armor fastened tight. He arrived exactly on time. No coat, his shirt sleeves rolled to the forearm, a cup of black coffee in his hand, and she felt, with some annoyance, a slight shift in her equilibrium. She asked about the guest list. He named 40 families, and she wrote them without expression, though the weight of those names, the titles, the land, the reach, told her that this was not a wedding. This was a political event dressed in flowers. The venue? She asked. Here, the estate chapel in the grounds. Flowers? Your choice. She looked up from her notes. You have no preference? He met her eyes across the table. The aesthetic details are why I hired you. You hired me, she said carefully, to plan my own wedding. The details are not irrelevant to me simply because they are irrelevant to you. A pause. White roses, he said. She preferred white roses. The pronoun landed oddly. She. Rosalind wrote it down and did not ask who he meant. Not yet. Later that afternoon, she walked the gallery to measure the corridor for floral arrangements. She was counting paces, making notes, when she glanced up at the portraits, the long line of Ashenmore dukes and their wives, stretching back 2 centuries in oil and formal silence. She stopped. At the far end of the gallery, hung slightly apart from the others, was a portrait of a woman in a blue gown. Dark hair. Bali skin. A particular quality to her expression. Composed, watchful, quietly fierce. Rosalind's portfolio slipped again. She was looking at her own face. Not exactly, not perfectly, but near enough. The shape of the jaw, the eyes, the way the woman held her chin, that a stranger walking into this gallery might have done a double take. The plaque beneath the portrait read, Eleanor Vane, Duchess of Ashenmore, 1798-1821, dead 20 years. Rosalind stood in the gallery for a long time after that, portfolio pressed against her chest, the fire crackling softly at the hall's far end. She had been chosen deliberately. She just didn't yet know why. She told herself it was a coincidence. She told herself a lot of things that week that didn't hold up past midnight. But the portrait watched her from the end of the gallery every time she passed, and the Duke's closed hands stayed in her mind long after the study door had closed behind her. Something was being kept from her, and the thing about secrets, Rosalind had learned, was that the larger they were, the more tightly they were held, the harder they eventually fell. The days at Ashenmore fell into a rhythm that unsettled her precisely because of how natural it felt. Mornings were for work, the lists, the arrangements, the elaborate logistics of constructing a society wedding in 8 weeks from the inside of the very house it would take place in. In the afternoons, the Duke occasionally appeared, not to interfere, just to be present. He would take the chair near the window with a document of his own, and they would occupy the same space in a silence that grew, as the days passed, less like a wall and more like a conversation neither of them had started yet. She noticed things about him that she had no business noticing. The way he read, completely still, one hand flat on the page. The way he took his coffee, black and without ceremony. The particular restraint with which he listened, not waiting for his turn to speak, but actually listening, his eyes steady, his expression giving almost nothing away. Almost. On the 4th evening, she made an error in the seating arrangement, placed a lord directly beside his estranged brother-in-law, a social catastrophe so elementary that she'd caught it immediately and corrected it before anyone else saw. She was staring at the revised chart with the focused expression of someone conducting a small personal trial when she heard, from the chair near the window, a quiet sound. She looked up. The Duke's mouth had shifted, barely, a fraction, into something that might, on another man, have been called a smile. "You caught it," he said. "Obviously," she replied. The almost smile held a moment longer than it had any right to. "My last event planner did not catch it. We spent most of the Harrington dinner managing the consequences." "Then your last event planner did not do her job." Rosalind turned back to her chart. "I do mine." He said nothing after that. But she felt his attention remain on her for a while before it returned to his own work. A slow, considered wait, like a man recalibrating something. She told herself she didn't notice. She noticed. The invitation came on the 5th day, a society dinner at the Pemberton townhouse, the kind of event where the peerage gathered under the pretense of pleasure and conducted the actual business of influence over the fish course. He told her she would attend on his arm. "We need to be seen," he said. "Engaged couples who are never seen together invite speculation." "We are not engaged," she said. "The contract says otherwise." She held his gaze. "The contract says I agreed to plan a wedding. It does not say I agreed to perform a courtship, Miss Fair." Something sharpened in his eyes. Not anger, something more careful than that. "There are people attending this dinner who will be watching us specifically. I need them to see exactly what I present. If you walk in, beside me looking like a woman who has been retained against her will, I will look exactly like a woman attending a dinner," she said. "Which is what I am." He was quiet for a moment. Then, almost reluctantly, "Wear the blue. It suits you." She opened her mouth to ask how he knew what color was in her wardrobe, and then closed it, because the answer, she suspected, would unsettle her considerably. The Pemberton dining room was everything she was accustomed to managing rather than occupying. Gilded, crowded, loud with the specific orchestrated noise of people performing importance at one another. She had spent years in rooms like this invisible. Tonight, on Raphael Vane's arm, she was anything but. The stares followed them from the entrance. Some curious, some calculating, a few poorly disguised as congratulatory. She kept her chin level and her expression composed and thought, with remote professional admiration, that she had never fully appreciated how much armor good posture was. He stayed close. Not touching, just present, his shoulder near her shoulder, his voice when he spoke only reaching her. It was a kind of architecture, deliberate space, deliberately maintained. She was beginning to understand that everything he did was deliberate. It was Lord Cedric Greywall who found her during the interval between courses, while Raphael was briefly drawn into conversation with an older earl. He was handsome in the architectural way of men who know it, built for rooms like this, comfortable in his own considerable social gravity. He took the space beside her with the ease of someone who expected to be welcomed. "Miss Fair," he said, and smiled. "Planning a wedding, I hear. Ashenmoor's, no less. You must be extraordinarily talented." "I am," she said. He laughed, genuinely, a flash of surprise in it. "I like that. Most women in your position would have been modest. Modesty doesn't build schedules." He turned toward her more fully, his voice dropping. "Tell me, does he treat you well? Ashenmoor can be rigorous with his standards." Something flickered in the question, a hook beneath the pleasantry. "His standards are precise," she said carefully. "I respect that. Of course." Greywall's smile remained, but his eyes had shifted, assessing now. The charm still present, but the intention behind it changed. "Only a woman like you, capable, obviously clever. It would be a shame if you found yourself in a position you hadn't entirely chosen." "I am quite capable of choosing my positions," Rosalind said. "Are you?" His voice was still pleasant, perfectly pleasant. "Only I've heard things about why Ashenmoor is so keen on this particular arrangement, about why he chose you specifically." He tilted his head. "Has he told you about Eleanor?" The name hit like a stone dropped into still water. She kept her face still. "I don't know what you mean." "No," Greywall said softly. "I didn't think so." Then Raphael was there. She hadn't heard him approach. He was simply present, beside her, with the silent certainty of a man who moved through rooms the way weather moved, announcing itself only after arrival. His hand settled at the small of her back. Light, but there, an unmistakable signal. "Greywall," he said. His voice was perfectly even, perfectly controlled. His eyes were not. "Ashenmoor." Greywall smiled, untroubled, and stepped back. "Lovely to meet your planner. She's quite remarkable." "Yes," said the Duke without breaking Greywall's gaze. "She is." Greywall excused himself, and the Duke's hand remained at her back for several seconds after he'd gone. A beat past what courtesy required, past what performance demanded. before it withdrew. She said nothing about it at the moment. She filed it away with the portrait and the closed hands and the name he'd dropped 4 days ago. She preferred white roses, and told herself she would sort through it all when she had enough pieces. The carriage home was quiet for a long time. London moved past the windows in gaslight and shadow, and Rosalind sat across from him with her hands folded in her lap, composing herself, and tried to decide which of the 7 questions she'd been constructing all evening she would ask first. "He mentioned Eleanor," she said. The Duke did not flinch, but something settled in his jaw, a new stillness, denser than the usual one. "I know," he said. "You knew he would. I suspected." She looked at him steadily. "And you sent me in without warning. I needed to see how you handled it." His eyes met hers across the dim interior. "I needed to know if he would try to use you." "He did try," she said. "Yes." A pause. "You handled it. That is not the point." Her voice did not rise. It never rose, but the precision of it sharpened. "The point is that you are withholding things that affect my safety, things that are directly relevant to why I am here, and you told me you would explain. I will." "When?" His jaw moved. "When I know you're safe enough to carry the weight of it." The carriage moved through the dark. The silence rebuilt itself around them. Different now. Charged with something unfinished, something that had no clean resolution at this hour. Then his hand moved, across the seat, not reaching for hers exactly, more like moving in her direction and arriving. His fingers settled over the back of her hand with a gentleness entirely at odds with the rest of him. Not a grip, not a performance, just warmth in the dark, quiet and uncalculated. She looked down at his hand. He did not move it. She did not move hers. They rode the rest of the way home in silence, and neither of them mentioned it when they arrived. But she lay awake for a long time that night, staring at the ceiling of her borrowed rooms, thinking about deliberate men and the things they did without calculation. In the morning, she found a letter on her breakfast tray, unsigned, no seal, 3 words, "Leave before Tuesday." She did not show him the letter. She told herself it was because she was still deciding what it meant. But the truth, if she pressed it, was simpler and less comfortable. She was not yet ready to watch him decide what to do about it without telling her why. She was not a woman who enjoyed being managed. She kept the letter in the inner pocket of her portfolio, next to her floor plans and her vendor correspondence, and she went about her work with the same precise efficiency she always brought to a commission. She sent the floral orders. She confirmed the catering house. She corresponded with the Ashenmore Chapel's groundskeeper about the aisle length and the canopy requirements. She planned a wedding for a bride she had not yet agreed to be, in a house full of things she was not yet allowed to know. It was, she thought, the strangest commission she had ever accepted. On the 6th morning he found her in the gallery. She had come back to the portrait. She wasn't entirely sure why, only that it pulled at her the way unfinished problems pulled, demanding attention until properly understood. She stood before it with her arms crossed and her head tilted, studying Eleanor Vane's composed, watchful face. "She died of fever," he said from the doorway. She did not startle. She had heard him coming, or perhaps she had simply, in less than a week, learned the particular rhythm of his presence. "That is what the records say," she replied. He walked into the gallery slowly, stopping a few feet to her left, regarding the portrait as she did. In her peripheral vision, he was very still. "She was 23, he said. "We have been married for 14 months. Rosalind said nothing. She understood, in moments like this, that silence was its own kind of response, the one that left room for the thing that actually needed to be said. "She did not die of fever." His voice was quiet, level, but beneath it, something old and cold. "She died because someone in her household chose to ensure it, slowly, carefully, in a way that looked, to every physician who examined her, entirely natural." The gallery held the silence. "Greywall," Rosalind said. "His family." A pause. "His father was the architect. Cedric inherited the politics, and the guilt." She turned to look at him then. He was still watching the portrait, his profile clean and sharp against the gallery's muted light. A man carrying something that had been too heavy for too long, and had learned to hold it so quietly that most people never saw the weight. "And I," she said carefully, "look enough like her to bring him into the open." He turned to meet her eyes. Yes, there it was. The architecture of it. Finally, all at once, spreading out before her like a floor plan she had been measuring from the wrong angle. The commission, the marriage contract, the insistence on her specifically, the dinner, the introduction, Greywall's careful probing. She was bait. She had been bait from the beginning. The gallery was very quiet. The fire at the far end ticked and settled. "Say it," he said. "You use my resemblance to your dead wife to draw out the man you believe killed her," she said. "Without telling me, without asking. You placed me in proximity to a dangerous man while I believed my only risk was planning a wedding no one had explained to me." "Yes, and the letter on my breakfast tray," she said. "Leave before Tuesday. That was him, warning me off." Yes, something moved in his eyes, the first real fracture in that controlled surface. "I did not anticipate he would move that quickly." "No," she said. "You did not." She unfolded her arms and folded them again, a contained gesture, a woman sorting herself out. "You endangered me on a calculation, and the calculation was incomplete." "Yes," he said again. And then, after a pause with a different quality entirely, "I am sorry." She had not expected the apology, not the word, and not the way he said it. Stripped of performance, a man who did not apologize easily, and was doing it anyway, plainly, without negotiation. She held it for a moment. "Is the threat real?" she asked. "Not theoretical, real." "Greywall does not warn people twice," he said. "If he sent the letter, he is already considering what comes next." "Then tell me what you know," she said. "All of it. Right now, because I will not walk forward in this house without knowing what I am walking into." He told her. It came in pieces, restrained at first, then more complete as she held his gaze and waited out his pauses with the patient steadiness of a woman who did not flinch easily. Eleanor's illness, the symptoms that had been explained away, the physician who had retired to the country with unusual haste and unusual means, the estate records that Raphael had spent 3 years quietly reconstructing, building a case stone by stone, waiting for the one piece he could not manufacture. Greywall acting. "I needed him to believe he had an advantage," Raphael said. "A duke with a new bride who looks like the woman he killed. It would be intolerable to him. He would move to secure his position. And when he moved, I would have him. And I am the advantage he thinks he has," Rosalind said. "You were meant to be." He looked at her directly. "I did not expect." He stopped. She waited. "I did not expect to find it difficult," he said. "Keeping you at a distance." The gallery absorbed this. Rosalind kept her face composed and felt, somewhere under her ribcage, a complicated warmth she had no immediate use for. "That changes nothing about the danger," she said. "No," he agreed. "It doesn't. What is your plan?" "I have filed a preliminary record with the Crown's Counsel. I need one more piece, Greywall's direct action. When he moves against you, you will use it as evidence." "Yes." She looked at him for a long moment. "You intend to let him come for me?" "I intend to be between you and him when he does," he said. The quietness of it was absolute. Not a boast, not a performance. A simple statement of intent, as structural as a load-bearing wall. She believed him. That was the disquieting part. That night, she moved through the house differently. She had always moved through it with professional attention, cataloging it as a venue, marking its dimensions and its sight lines. Now she moved through it understanding that it was also a trap, set carefully, with her standing at its center. She passed the gallery on her way upstairs and did not look at the portrait. She stopped at the window on the landing instead, looking out over the dark grounds, the formal garden, the chapel at the far edge of the trees, the lamp still burning in the Duke's study on the ground floor. He was still awake, still working. She thought about the weight he had been carrying for 3 years. Building a case alone, methodically, while everyone else attributed his coldness to grief and his isolation to temperament and his control to breeding. She thought about the way he had reached for her hand in the dark carriage. "I did not expect to find it difficult." Below, the lamp in his study burned steadily. She turned from the window and went to bed. She did not sleep for some time. 3 days before the deadline in the letter, the threat stopped being theoretical. She was in the garden just after dawn, walking the chapel path to assess the morning light for the ceremony timing, when she heard footsteps behind her on the gravel. Not the household staff's familiar rhythms, different pacing, different weight, arriving from the direction of the garden's east gate. She turned. Lord Greywall stepped from the shade of the hedgerow. He was not smiling now. There was no dinner party pleasantry, no charm deployed as armor. He looked at her with the particular directness of someone who had decided that pleasantries were a waste of the available time. "You received my letter," he said. "I did," she said. She held her portfolio against her chest. Unconsciously, she realized. A habit. A shield, and you're still here. I am. He considered her. You don't know what you're standing in the middle of, Miss Fair. I know more than you assume, she said. Something changed in his face. A tightening. Then you know that the safest thing you can do is remove yourself. The Duke is using you. When he's finished with you. When will he's finished? She met his eyes. Steady. You came to my place of work before dawn to tell me that a man is using me. A man who sent me an anonymous threat. Forgive me if the source affects my confidence in the council. Greywall's jaw shifted. You're smarter than I thought, he said, and there was no compliment in it. Yes, she said, I am. She heard the garden door open behind her, the heavy oak that led from the house's eastern passage. She did not look away from Greywall, but she felt him arrive. Raphael came to stand beside her, not in front of her, not between them, but beside her, shoulder to shoulder, with the specific precision of a man making a statement about positions. His voice when he spoke was so controlled it was almost pleasant. Greywall, he said, you are on my property without invitation. I'd suggest you correct that immediately. For a long moment, the three of them existed in the morning quiet of the garden, the chapel visible at the tree line, the white roses Rosalind had ordered already beginning to bloom along the path. Greywall looked between them. Then he turned and walked back through the east gate, and did not look back. Raphael did not move until the gate had closed. Then he turned to her. His eyes moved over her face, checking, cataloging, the way a man looks at something he has been afraid of losing. Are you hurt? He asked. No, she said. I held my ground. I know, he said. I watched from the window. A pause. I arrived as soon as I could. She looked at him. You were watching. Yes, she absorbed this. How long have you been watching? He was quiet for a moment. Since the morning after the dinner, he said, when I realized I could not account for my own behavior in the carriage. The rose beds were beginning to catch the early light. The chapel bell began its slow toll for the morning hour. Rosalind looked at the man beside her, this controlled, complicated, deeply private man who had built a 3-year case alone and had not, apparently, anticipated that proximity would make things complicated. You shouldn't have told me sooner, she said. Yes, he said. All of it. Yes. She turned back toward the house. He fell into step beside her. Their arms were close enough to touch, and neither moved to close the final distance. But neither moved away. She told herself, that afternoon, that she was leaving. She was very convincing. She packed with the efficient precision of a woman who had assembled and disassembled her professional life in borrowed rooms across London a dozen times. She packed her portfolio, her correspondence files, and her vendor contracts. She wrote 3 letters, one to the catering house, one to the florist, one to the groundskeeper at the chapel, formally withdrawing from the commission. She did not write one to the Duke. She could not decide what to say to him that was both honest and survivable. She left before dinner, while he was in the study with his solicitor. She did not say goodbye to the household staff. She took only what she had brought. In the carriage to her hired rooms across the city, she sat very straight and kept her hands folded, and told herself that the tightness in her chest was the entirely reasonable response of a sensible woman who had discovered she had been used and was now correcting the situation. She was very sensible. She was also, she admitted to herself, somewhere around Fleet Street, absolutely miserable. Her hired rooms felt smaller than she remembered. Lower ceilings, narrower windows. The kind of space that had been perfectly adequate before she had spent 10 days in the east wing of Ashenmore House and learned, apparently, to require more light than this. She unpacked. She made tea. She sat at her own small desk with her own ledger and stared at the blank page. She had 3 other commissions waiting. Good ones. A viscount's daughter in February. A bath wedding for a family with generous taste and a generous budget. She had work. She had always had work. Work was the one thing she had always been able to rely on. She tried to focus on the February commission. She opened the file. She read the same paragraph 4 times without retaining a word of it. At midnight, she gave up and went to bed. At 2 in the morning, someone knocked on her door. Not a servant's knock, not a neighbor. The particular weight of a knock from someone who had decided they were going to knock and was not uncertain about it. She wrapped her robe around herself and opened the door. Lord Greywall stood in the narrow hallway. He was still polished, still composed, but there was something different in his posture now. A new tension, the kind that came from a man whose options had been narrowing for several hours, and who had arrived at the last one. Miss Fair, he said, I need you to listen to me carefully. She did not step back. She did not open the door further. How did you find this address? I have resources. A pause. I also have a proposal. I imagine you do, she said. The Duke is building a case against my family, Greywall said. He said it plainly, abandoning, finally, the architecture of implication. He has been constructing it for 3 years. I don't know how much he has, but I know you've been in that house. I know he trusts you. His voice was careful, measured. If you were willing to provide a statement, nothing dishonest, simply a clarification of certain events from your time in the house, I can ensure that you are protected, financially, permanently. You would never need to take a commission again. She looked at him. He had, she realized, a very complete misunderstanding of what she valued. You want me to testify against him, she said. I want you to tell the truth. The truth, she said slowly, is that I watched a man spend 3 years building a careful, documented case against the person he believes responsible for his wife's death. The truth is that you sent me an unsigned threat at breakfast. The truth is that you arrived at my employer's property before dawn and at my private address at 2 in the morning. She held his gaze. I am not certain which of those truths you'd like me to clarify. Greywall's composed expression developed a fracture. You don't understand what he is, he said. I understand what you are, she replied. I'd like you to leave now. He didn't move immediately. For a moment, she felt the particular weight of a man deciding whether what he wanted was worth what it would cost. She stood very still and did not let him see that her hands, out of his sightline, were trembling. Then he left. She closed the door. She stood with her back against it and let herself breathe for a full minute before her legs felt reliable again. She was sitting at her desk, not working, simply sitting, cataloging the interior damage of the last several hours, when she heard, shortly before 3 in the morning, a different knock. She knew it immediately, the precise contained weight of it, the knock of a man who was not uncertain but who was also, and she heard this now, in a way she hadn't been listening before, not entirely steady. She opened the door. Raphael Vane was in her doorway. No coat. His cravat undone, the first button of his shirt open, his hair slightly disrupted in the way of a man who had been running his hands through it. He looked like himself, and unlike himself, and she registered both things at once with a clarity she attributed to the hour and the evening, and the fact that she was very tired and could not manage her usual professional distance. His eyes moved over her face, taking stock, cataloging. He came here, Raphael said. Yes. Are you hurt? No. A pause. How did you know? I had someone watching your building. His jaw moved. I know I had no right to. You did not, she agreed. I could not. He stopped, started again. I could not leave you entirely unprotected and pretend to myself that it was for your independence. She looked at him in the doorway. This man who had arrived in her narrow hallway at 3 in the morning with his cravat undone and his control just slightly cracked at the edges. And she thought about Eleanor in the portrait and 3 years of solitary reconstruction and the hand in the dark carriage, and I did not expect to find it difficult. Come in, she said, before the neighbors wake up. He sat in her one good chair, and she made tea she suspected neither of them would drink. And the small hired room held them both with an intimacy that the grandeur of Ashenmore had never quite managed, because there was nowhere to maintain a professional distance in 900 square feet with a cold hearth and a shared pot of tea at 3 in the morning. Tell me all of it, she said. Not the version for the solicitor, all of it. And he did. It came differently here, less architecture, less controlled, because he was tired and she was tired, and the hour had stripped them both of the performance they usually ran in parallel to everything else. He told her about Eleanor's last weeks, about the physician's report and the anomalies he hadn't understood, until he found a second opinion, then a third, then a fourth, about the estate ledger that placed a Greywall associate at Ashenmore in the month before Eleanor's decline, about 3 years of building something he could take to the Crown's Council, stone by stone, in silence, because if he moved too quickly or too publicly, Greywall would know, and the evidence would vanish. And then, he said, I saw your name on a commission recommendation, and I saw your photograph in the society pages. A pause. I told myself it was purely strategic. And now? She asked. He looked at her across the small room. The fire had gone out. The candle on her desk was burning low. His face in that light was open in a way she had not seen in the study or the gallery or the dinner or the garden. Open the way people only got at 3 in the morning when they had run out of energy for the alternative. "I planned a trap," he said. "I did not plan for you." The candle guttered softly. "The evidence you filed with the Crown's Counsel," she said. "Is it enough?" "Almost." His eyes held hers. "Greywall's appearance at your address tonight will be documented. My man outside saw him enter and leave. That, added to the letter, added to the garden." He stopped. "It may be enough." "And if it isn't?" she asked. "Then I will find what is still missing," he said, "however long it takes." She set down her teacup. "He offered me money," she said, "to testify against you. He seems to believe I am in a position to be bought." "Are you?" he asked. "No," she said. He held her gaze. "Rosalind." It was the first time he had used her name. Not Miss Fair, not his controlled professional address, but her name in her own room, in the low candlelight, with the particular quality of a man who had been turning a word over for some time and had finally decided to say it. Something shifted irreversibly in the 900 square feet between them. "What happens next?" she said. Her voice was steady. She reflected with some distant appreciation, very good at steadying. "I would like," he said, "to ask you something, properly, as opposed to presenting you with a document and telling you to sit." The candle had nearly burned itself out. "Ask," she said. He was quiet for a moment, the kind of quiet that had weight and texture and was doing actual work. "Will you come back to Ashenmore?" he said, "not as my planner, not as a strategy, as the woman I should have been honest with from the beginning." The room held the question. Outside, London turned quietly on its axis in the dark. "You will owe me every answer you have been withholding," she said, "from the beginning." "Yes," he said, "I know." "And the wedding, it is yours to decide," he said. "Every detail, including whether it happens." She looked at him for a long moment. "White roses," she said finally. She preferred them. I think she had good taste. And Raphael Vane, Duke of Ashenmore, who had not smiled completely in 3 years, smiled. She returned to Ashenmore on a Wednesday morning. 2 weeks before the wedding she had been hired, and chosen, and lied to, and protected, and finally simply asked to plan. The house received her differently this time. Or perhaps she received it differently. The East Wing felt less borrowed. The gallery felt less like a riddle. She passed Eleanor's portrait on her first walk through and paused, not with the cold shock of recognition this time, but with a quieter feeling. Something closer to acknowledgement between two women who had both, in their own seasons, been underestimated by men who thought they knew what they were dealing with. "You had good taste," she thought, and kept walking. The Crown's Counsel received the complete file 4 days after her return. Raphael presented it with the same controlled precision he brought to everything. Documents ordered, evidence catalogued, the 3 years of patient construction finally assembled into its full form and delivered into hands with the authority to act on it. The Greywall family's solicitors were notified the following morning. Cedric Greywall himself received a Crown summons by Thursday afternoon. Rosalind heard the news from Raphael in the study, where they had been reviewing the final seating arrangement for the wedding breakfast. He told her simply, without ceremony, the way he always delivered information he considered essential. She set down her pen. "Is it enough?" she asked. "Yes," he said. She looked at him. "You're certain?" The solicitor called it airtight. A pause. "Eleanor will have justice." The study was quiet. Outside, the grounds were beginning the slow transition into late October. The formal garden tidied. The chapel path lined with the first of the white roses already in place. The whole estate arranged as carefully as any floor plan she had ever drawn. She thought about 3 years. About a man who had carried this alone, methodically, without letting it make him cruel. Only careful. Only controlled. Only very, very patient. "Raphael," she said. He looked at her. It still moved something in her, the way he looked at her. Completely, without the reservation he applied to everything else. As though she were the one context in which careful management had genuinely failed him. "It's enough," she said. "What you did for her. It's enough." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "I know." And the simplicity of it, the way he accepted it, without deflection, without the armor he usually wore, told her that he had needed to hear it said plainly by someone who wasn't inside his own grief. She reached across the table and covered his hand with hers. He turned his hand and held on. The morning of the wedding came clear and cold. She had planned it precisely, which was to say she had planned the mechanics, the flowers, the timing, the seating, the procession, and had discovered, in the final weeks, that the details she had arranged for strangers her entire career felt entirely different when she was arranging them for herself. The white roses were perfect. She had known they would be. She dressed in the Ashenmore dressing room with her maid and found, in the wardrobe, a gown that had been delivered 3 days prior with a note in his handwriting. Your choice was always more important than mine. But if you want a second opinion, I found this. R. The gown was ivory silk, simple and precise, nothing ostentatious. It was, exactly, what she would have chosen. She wore it. She stood before the mirror for a long moment, looking at the woman looking back at her. Not the planner, not the professional, not the carefully constructed armor of competence and composure she had been wearing for years, and felt, with something she eventually identified as relief, that she recognized herself. The chapel was exactly as she had designed it. The white roses along the aisle. The morning light through the old glass makes slow, colored patterns on the stone floor. The small gathering, only those who mattered, only those who mattered, only those he trusted, which was a short list for a man who trusted carefully and absolutely. He was waiting at the altar. He did not look at the doors when they opened. He had been looking toward them since before she appeared. She could tell, from the particular stillness of a man who had been holding himself in place by force of will for some time. When she came into his view, the stillness broke, almost imperceptibly, into something softer. She walked toward him with her portfolio nowhere in sight. She had not dropped it this time. She had simply left it behind. When she reached him and they turned to face each other properly, she looked at his face, steady, open, entirely present, and thought that of all the weddings she had planned, this was the first one where she had not known the ending in advance. The vicar spoke. The words were the same words she had heard at 100 ceremonies, but they landed differently when they were landing on her. When it came to Raphael's vows, he deviated from the formal text. She heard the change in his voice a syllable before it arrived, the slight shift from recitation to declaration. I owe you every reason I withheld, he said, quietly. Just for her, though the chapel was perfectly still and carried every word. I will spend my life paying that debt, with honesty, and with everything that comes with it. She held his hands at the altar and felt, in the clean clarity of that October morning, that the 8 weeks she had spent planning this day had not prepared her for this moment at all. Some things could not be arranged in advance. Some things arrived regardless of schedules. I do, she said. He smiled. Fully, completely. In the way she had first seen in the study over a corrected seating chart, and had been thinking about ever since. I know, said. Later, much later, after breakfast and the guests and the long, slow winding down of the day. They walked the chapel path in the late afternoon light. The white roses had done everything she'd designed them to do, and the grounds were settling into the golden quiet of an autumn evening, and she had his arm and no portfolio and no floor plan and no professionally maintained distance. You dropped it, he said. She looked up at him. Your portfolio, he said, in the study, the first morning. I know, she said. I thought about picking it up for you. A pause. I wanted to see what you would do. She considered this. And what did I do? You picked it up yourself, he said, with complete composure. Another pause. I think that was the moment. She thought about a letter with a wolf's head seal, about a portrait in a gallery, about 3 words on an unsigned note and a hand in a dark carriage, and a man in her narrow doorway at 3 a.m. with his cravat undone and his control slightly fractured at the edges. I knew you'd catch it, she said. When it slipped again, I knew. He looked at her. Did you? A man who watches the garden from the window before dawn, she said, was always going to catch it. The chapel bell rang for an hour. The roses caught the last of the light. Raphael Vane, Duke of Ashenmore, put his arm around his wife and said nothing, which was, she had learned, his way of saying everything that mattered. Some love stories begin with a letter. Some begin with a command dressed as a request, or a name on a contract no one has explained yet, or a portfolio dropped at the wrong moment and retrieved with perfect composure. Some begin in galleries, standing before a portrait of a woman who looked like you, feeling the cold weight of a secret too large to carry alone. Rosalind had spent her entire career arranging other people's most important days. She had measured sight lines and confirmed vendors and corrected seating charts with the precision of someone who understood that love deserved logistics. She had never planned for this, for a man who watched the garden before dawn and reached for her hand in the dark and deviated from the formal text when it mattered. For the particular way that being truly seen by someone felt like finally setting down something heavy you had been carrying for so long you had stopped noticing the weight. But perhaps that was the truth worth sitting with, in the quiet after the day has ended, and the roses are still blooming, and the person beside you is exactly where they decided to be. Some things cannot be planned. Some things arrive regardless of the schedule. And the best ones, the truest ones, are the ones you did not arrange in advance. You simply showed up, and so did they. If this story moved something in you, if you found yourself holding your breath in that chapel, or thinking about a hand in a dark carriage, or the particular courage it takes to walk towards someone who has not been entirely honest, and choose to believe in what they are becoming, then you already understand the kind of love worth waiting for. Subscribe so you never miss a story. Leave a comment telling us your favorite moment. Was it the garden at dawn, the doorway at 3 in the morning, or those quiet words at the altar? Share this with someone who needs to hear that showing up, truly, honestly, without the armor, is always worth it. We will see you in the next story. Another letter, another seal, another love that no one saw coming. Until then, rest well, and know that the best chapters of your own story are still ahead.